Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Beyond the Manuscript. As always, I am your host, Cooper Anderson, coming to you from my very own library pocket dimension here. If you like what I do here, please, for me, hit those four little buttons that help me do what I love, which is talk to you lovely folks about books. And if you wanted to leave a review, please, it's always going to help out the channel. My guest today is a disabled poet who spends most of her time writing in a cabin in the woods. She has been writing all of her life, but it wasn't until she faced the cardiac ward that she finally published any of her work. Here today to talk about all things poetry and writing related, please help me in welcoming my guest, Kelly Lynn Curry. How are we doing today, Kelly?
I'm good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is kind of it's really interesting. So, I've had a couple other writer friends just send me your stuff, and I was like, oh, I want to get her on the show, and this is gonna be really, just gonna be a fun time. So to kind of get things started today, can you please tell us all about your writing, from your books to your recent award-winning poetry, and can you please tell us all about it?
I write poetry of hope, loss, love. Recently started writing about pain because I have a lot of pain, physical and emotional, which is, I think we all do. And I want to write a novel in the future if I have that capacity because I don't focus well. But
Who does these days,
I
right?
I know, right? But my poetry, I try to connect with people as much as possible through my own experiences, but I try to connect with my own experiences, but shared experiences as well.
hmm
And I really want to help people find their inner and really bring hope and happiness to them as much as possible.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good goal, I think,
Yeah.
for sure. So when with the idea of hope being the focus of your poetry specifically, for you, what kind of subject matter does that bring into your poetry? Is it just about yourself? Is it about people, nature? What kind of subjects are you writing about?
Well, my first two books were very all over the place, I would say. Just hitting all notes of emotion and hope, just broad spectrum hope. My third book
hmm
was about hope in the hospital, my
Mm,
chronic illness, my disability, and trying to connect with people in the chronic illness and disability community and share the hope that I could provide and just my experience in the hospital.
sure. I
Yeah.
think it's a pretty relatable topic too. I
Yeah.
think for anyone who's not even just has a serious or chronic illness, but anyone who's had just any kind of dealing with going to a hospital, it could be very isolating. It could be
Yeah.
very, through reasons of how a health system should work. It could also be a pretty dehumanizing, I think, at times, just because that's kind of how you, in some cases, have to operate in a hospital setting in order to treat people to the best of their abilities. But as a patient, it doesn't feel that way. It feels cold, sterile, and it can be cold. I think it's just a cold
Yeah.
experience, I
It's
think.
definitely it's dehumanizing. Um, you can have a lot of disconnect with the people treating you.
hmm
And I just want to bring some light at the end of the tunnel with my poetry.
And I
Even
think
if,
I think especially around these kind of days, that's really necessary.
yeah,
Like the world is going to need more of that rather than less.
yeah, and especially with people who deal with chronic illness, we're always in doctors' offices and hospitals and dealing with that. And so just being able to relate at all to poetry, specifically targeted at that, I think is a good outsource, just being able to relate.
Absolutely. I think the it's always going to benefit more from more connection rather than less.
Yeah.
Going back to writing specifically, through the different stages kind of through your life, we're talking about, as a kid growing up, in your adolescence, and now even, whose writing would you say has impacted or influenced you the most?
I think when I was a little, definitely like Roald Dahl, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Those were the books that my dad read to me when I was a little kid. Like when he would get home, he's a doctor. So when he would get from home from the hospital, he would read to me every night before I went to bed. And those were the books that I remember vividly. And as I got older, things obviously changed. I remember I've been writing all my life. So my adolescence was impacted by the books that I read in school. So Of Mice and Men, Gatsby. But the book that impacted me the most and my writing was Dracula by Bram Stoker. And just the
Mm,
way he wrote Dracula's castle and going up to the door, that influenced me so much. Highlighting that passage and saying, this has changed me. This is going to change my writing. And I remember
mm.
writing more descriptive ever since then. I remember my writing being so impacted.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about Dracula, as in,
Sure.
like, so what is it about that book or the characters in that book that really spoke to you?
So with Dracula, I don't think that it was this, like, I don't particularly like the story, which I think is hilarious. Like, I have multiple copies because I love the writing, but I don't like the storyline very much. It's just so impeccable. The detail, the way he makes you feel is just amazing. And the characters are great, but it's really the writing and description that really took my breath
Sure,
away. And
absolutely. Yeah, I
that's
can definitely agree with that.
me.
Good.
Yeah, he's an amazing writer.
And
And
who would be a yeah, I was gonna, who's a modern author's writing who's really impacting you now?
that's so crazy because I read like a lot of older poets that impact me now are more I read more poetry now than I read other things like, and they're people that I know like Rachel Clift, our Cliff Poetry. She's impacted me immensely. Gill, I don't know her personally, but like her poetry impacted me so much because her poetry is breathtaking and impactful
Mm,
and dramatic, and she knows how to write amazingly. Makes me speechless.
sure.
Let's see who else. Maggie Bauer, he's amazing. He writes with such impact, and I'm so glad to be friends with him. And even Kristen Reed, who's a friend of mine, she's an amazing
Friend
writer.
of the show. Yeah.
Yeah, friend of the show. Definitely amazing writer. And I can't wait to read her upcoming poetry. I bet it's going to be amazing. There's a lot of people that I've met through Instagram who have opened their arms to me, taught me amazing things through poetry. And like our Cliff Poetry, me with my poetry when I was first starting out. So I'm really lucky to have made the connections that I've made through Instagram.
Sure, absolutely. I think that's an underrated benefit. I think when
Yeah.
people who do read is that you do have an ability to not only connect with people who are writing and creating nowadays, but you can connect with people like Bram Stoker, who has long since passed, but his their works still live on, and they can still have an ability to impact others around us. And I think that is a kind of an unspoken benefit, I think, if you're a big reader or writer.
Yeah, I feel like I've connected with my best friend from college. We used to swap books every day of reading. Like we would devour books, and we still connect through books that we enjoy. And my one of my friends from high school, I still send. She lives in Boston now, and she and I send each other book recommendations, post stuff about books that she's read, whether they be guilty pleasure novels or old classics. And I'll like respond to her and tell her like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you read that book, it's such a guilty pleasure. And then Dracula, and I was just like gushing over it. And it's just an unspoken language that like everyone
Hmm.
can relate to, or it's not unspoken, it's a language, but
Yeah.
we all connect through books.
I would say for me, especially when it comes, just because I'm a big novel guy, it's
Yeah,
kind of like having shared memories with people who
it
maybe you don't
is.
even know yet. Especially if you find someone who loves the same book as you, and you're like, oh, didn't you love this chapter? Don't you love this character? And if they do, you're very much connected through having never met this person before, but you have those connections that you weren't aware of or that you are now newly formed through this medium. And I think it's pretty special. I think maybe music and like some artwork has that same kind of similar impact, but not too many other things. You mentioned earlier that you really want to spread a message of hope. In your opinion, how does someone who is really genuinely going through it and really struggling actually find it?
So I think hope is intrinsic. We all have it. But if you don't feel like you have it at that time, I think other people help you find it. Or just putting one foot in front of the other and just putting your head down and just continuing on as you go, you'll find it. Looking for it in small places. I lost hope this past winter and I felt like I was never going to find it again. And I reached out to people around me and said, "Hey, I need your help." And they gave me pieces of their own hope and, inspired me to write more and just like continue to the next day and just find hope in my pets, in the beautiful winter that I live, because I live in an amazing place, and just really try to continue on even though I felt hopeless. And
Hmm.
I feel like as you continue, you get it back. You find your hope again. It's just time.
Sure. Me personally, I subscribe to the theory that hope is not a finite resource in
Yeah.
order to be used up. It's still there. Even if you have a hard time finding it or feeling it or whatever, it doesn't leave. Even though it might feel like it a lot of times, but it's still there. It's still around you. Like you said, it's in the people. It's in the air. It's inside yourself. You just have to access it and like give it a chance to kind of grow, I think.
Yeah. It's definitely something we all have. It's just we can't see it, but it's there.
Yeah, agreed very much. What were some harsher lessons that you learned from publishing your first and second books, if you have any? Because I know you said your third book is the one you really love, but what were some things that you learned from doing your first and second ones?
My first and second book were really rushed. I wanted to get published so bad, and I was like, I have to do this right away. So I didn't take the time to really cultivate the books, to really like find a message. I just put a bunch of poems together, and I just rushed them out. I didn't edit it enough. I didn't do enough of the craft, I would feel like.
Mm-hmm.
I just really didn't take the time to do what I should have done. And then I thought, oh, everyone's going to buy this.
Yeah.
And everyone was hyping me up. And I was like, well, why don't I have all these sales? And I think that I was humbled, and that's good for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel much like I know to do the work now. And I love my third book. I think that I put the time in, and I knew I wasn't going to get like a million sales. And I'm more interested in making the connections to people who deserve, or not deserve the book, but like that want the book for hope and who really need the book. It's not
Sure.
about getting the mass production.
Do you want to tell us what the name of the third book is, or are you waiting
So
to
yeah,
reveal?
the third book is Radiant Poppy: Hope in the Hospital, and it's out now. It's
Mm.
been out, and you can go get it at Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Book Depository. Like it's mass produced.
In your opinion, what made this third book special on a writing aspect? So I know you said you were learning more of the business side with the first two,
Yeah.
but what was more impactful with this third one, emotionally, either through writing it or actually seeing it, on in ink and paper?
I think it just meant more because I took the time to really find a message that I wanted to put out.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really like the poems that I put in there. Like they really meant something to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like the words, and just, I don't know, it's just like I took a part of my soul and put it into this. I really love it. I love that it's like really bright and vibrant because I think
Mm-hmm.
hope is very vibrant. And the poems mean more to me because I wrote them when I was in the hospital and when I was really sick. So it was a piece of hope for me. It kept me going when I really felt like I shouldn't keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And I had someone work with me who knew that I was struggling, and she knew Arcliffe Poetry. She took this book and made it beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
She knew what I wanted, and she made it into something even better. And I'm just really lucky to have her as a poetry sister. That's what she
Yeah,
calls us. So I
I
really
like that.
appreciate all her work.
Yeah. I think it's just another unspoken kind of benefit of
Yeah.
not just writing, of just creating anything, right?
Yeah.
If you have a passion for creating, that becomes a big motivator. It becomes soothing for the soul, and I know we as a society tend to focus, especially in the art world, on how much money did it make you. But again, an unspoken benefit is this is just good for you to create.
Yeah.
Yes, there's obviously goals of being financially stable with your art, but the a big process should be the act of creation itself. That's what people should fall in love with, and because it's going to give you a lot more than you think, putting stuff into it rather than stuff you might get out of it.
Yeah, and I think my first two books, I loved the process, but I thought that like I deserved to have people recognize it. Whereas like this third book, it was just purely for me.
Mm,
And it was like I didn't care what sales I got. I didn't care who recognized it or how many people really it impacted. Like
mm-hmm.
I wanted it to help people if it did, but it was purely for me.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think that's an important lesson that young writers need to learn kind of early on is that you should be your first fan. You should be writing stuff for you, not so much the market. Again, you can do both. They don't have to be mutually exclusive of stuff that you like versus what the market likes. But if you make sure that you are the first fan of your book, it usually works out a lot better than people think.
Yeah, I'm part of a writing group, and there we have people come in and they go, "Well, what's selling now?
Mm-hmm.
What genre should I write to sell?" And we look at them and we're like, "No, that's not what it's about. You need to write for yourself
Yeah.
because that's what's going to be the most fulfilling. That's what's going to sell because you're writing what you love and it's more impactful."
So speaking of kind of just writing advice for people, what advice would you give someone who's just starting out?
Write, read as much as you possibly can
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and write as much as you possibly can. Um, write what you love and don't worry about like what is going to sell or if you're going to make an impact or anything like that. Just write what you love. And then I took journals from like when I was in my 20s and mixed them with writing from now for my first book. So I took writing that spanned like a decade and I just wrote what I loved. I mean, but I didn't appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my fault. But write. Don't it doesn't have to be like a whole poem. It doesn't have to be a whole chapter. It doesn't have to be a whole novel. You can write just like a scribble on a piece of paper that day because if it's something good or if it's something that you like, that's all that matters.
I will say this is a very true and very odd thing that was first pointed out to me when I was reading Stephen King's On Writing book is that the good ideas or the ideas that you love the most, they tend to stick around.
Yeah.
So like you said, if you write stuff on like a cocktail napkin somewhere, and you really like it and it's a really good idea or you feel like it's a good idea, you tend to remember that. You tend to be like, hey, this idea, this story, this feeling, this poem might have legs because I can't forget about it, or it's not leaving me. It might just be waiting in the wings in order for it to come out on stage whenever you actually find the time to actually make it.
Yeah, like my worst like fault as a writer is having a really good idea or a really good line and being in bed at night and saying, "Oh, I'll remember it." That's the worst advice. You will never remember
You
it.
don't. You need to write it down.
But if it's a good
You need
idea,
to yeah. You need to
if
have
it's
a
a
pen and paper or just the notes app on your phone
yeah,
nearby. You need to write it down because I've done that too many times
yeah.
myself. Where I'm like, that was $1 million idea, and now it's just in the ether for some reason.
But I think the good idea that like you miss will always come back to you. It may not be the exact wording, but it'll be the same feeling.
So the next question is, what are you working on now?
I'm working on my fourth book. I said it a little bit at the beginning.
Mm,
I haven't announced this in my newsletter, but I'll announce it here because why not?
sure.
So it's about pain, how it's universal, how it physical and emotional is what I'll be writing about.
Mm,
Um, how I'm tapping into that and how it can affect anyone. So you may not feel the physical pain part of my book, but you may really resonate with the emotional. And people who read it may feel the physical and not understand the emotional part, but it's universal, so we'll all feel some part of it. And I really feel like this book is the next step for me because I feel like I have a new poetry path with longer, deeper poetry, which is really
Sure.
exciting for me.
Yeah.
And one of the poems in it already won an award, which is really exciting.
Ooh, which award?
It's a publisher's award, so they picked that poem and it was their award for last year. So I can't say what publishing company right now because
Ah, okay.
they haven't published it yet. So it's just I
Everyone
just
watching
got
right
the
now, keep
letter.
keep an eye. Yeah, subscribe to her newsletter, and then you're gonna find out what it is later. We're
Yeah,
teasing the audience now.
subscribe to my newsletter.
Yeah.
I just found out about it. I just got the letter in my the email that I won, so it's very new. So
Is that just purely just as a fun question? Is that nerve wracking of like
yes,
knowing you're the winner for this, you can't tell anybody
yeah.
because they haven't announced it?
So I'm like, I won an award, but I can't say anything. I
Mhm.
actually just like started submitting my poems to like publishers and contests. So it's like really new for me. And so I'm excited, but like
Mhm.
I've gotten my first rejection and I'm like, okay, that didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. But
Yeah.
like the winning is very weird for me.
It's odd. It's it is jarring at first when other people who you don't know like your stuff.
Yeah.
And you're like, what do you mean? I like this, and my friends have to like it because they're my friends. But
Yeah.
you're a stranger who have no obligation to liking my things, and now you say you're gonna give me an award for it?
Yeah.
Are you okay?
I know. And like my mom, she always reads my poetry and like edits it
Mhm.
and like critiques it and helps make it better. And I appreciate that because she's very hard on me. But
Mm.
like she likes my poetry and she's one of my biggest fans. But she's like, Kelly, this is a really good poem. And I was like, I don't know, like I feel like it needs to be tweaked a little bit. She's like, just enter it. And I won. And I was like, oh, okay. So I guess you were right. And I feel really good about the poem, but like it's weird.
Yeah, it's an odd
So
feeling of
yeah, it's very
succeeding at
odd.
the thing that, for the most part, it takes a long time to
Yeah.
build your skills, for
It
sure.
really does because I it's a completely different poetry than what I have in my first two books, let alone my third book.
Hmm.
My third book is definitely shorter poems. This is a long form poem. So it's very different.
All right, well, Kelly, we're kind of running out of time here. Where can people find your stuff?
So you can go to my website, kellylyncurry.com, and that will kind of point you in where to get my books. You can find me at Writes the Unsaid on Instagram and Threads and Twitter. And that's about it.
All right, well, everyone, I want to say that Beyond the Manuscripts, of course, is powered by Manuscripts, where you never write alone. I want to thank my guest today, Miss Kelly Lynn Curry. You've been a great, wonderful guest, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks for having me.